they haven't yet.
They haven't done it yet.
Yeah, but go ahead. We can. Go ahead.
So I think we should get started if everybody's got their lunch and settled down. Very good afternoon to all of you. I am Sanjay Agarwal. I am with the Social Development Department, and it's an honor and privilege to kind of, open the event and offer a few remarks. So I'd just like to start off by congratulating the team. It was a very ambitious project. When I first heard how they're going to produce a book on open contracting in a week, I was like, okay, that is something which is asking for the impossible. But I see a copy here, and I look forward to hearing more about it. And so this is excellent, and I'd like to congratulate Marcella, Adam, and the rest of the team on actually being able to pull that off. It fits in with the science of delivery, and maybe this should go up all the way to the president to see, to kind of showcase how you can do it in a week, rather than take 2 years and produce something which most people don't read. But okay, that's how it is. So this is a very interesting topic, as most of us know. I mean, I was going through some numbers, and they say that $9.5 trillion of procurement happens in the world. That's more than the GDP of China. And that's a phenomenal amount. Having said that, I think procurement is at the heart of development, or heart of most operations, but more so in development, since all of us are development practitioners. And it is pretty much a closed kind of an operation process. I'll cite a personal example. Around 12 years ago, when I was in the civil service, where I was overseeing a lot of things, including the procurement of the district councils and the district offices, legislated and whatever the norms were. However, it was a very set way of institutionalizing corruption. And what would happen is, when the contract would go out, the powers that were would get 10% of the contract amount. When the bills would be processed, would be presented for payment, they'd have to pay between 1% to 2%. And this was a set figure in cash to whosoever, and it would go up and down the hierarchy. And having figured, I was very new, I was just 25 then, and it was like, okay, this goes on, great, now what do we do about it? The only thing that we did was to, which completely changed the way things were. There's obviously a lot of discretion involved, which is why this could happen. There's no transparency at all, and all we did was just to put out a list of which contracts, which bills have been presented at the end of the evening, and that is the sequence by which the bills would be paid out. And it made such a huge difference. We never actually did cost-benefit analysis or some kind of an impact evaluation. All these terms I kind of learned when I came to the bank. But so that's how it was there. And it made such a phenomenal change because the papers would report upon it. The interests that were affected would start calling, saying, why are you doing this? And it was just a simple step. At the end of the day, you see these are the bills that have come, and you just post them outside. That's it. I wanted to start off with this example because, one, it was a personal example, and two, it indicates how important transparency is for procurement of all things. I sometimes think in our cluster we've not paid too much attention to the procurement process, and there's several reasons behind that. However, whatever we do in transparency, participation, accountability is just touching the surface. Going into the heart of operations is procurement. We need to get into do a lot more on procurement. Just the sheer number of transactions, just the sheer number of the dollar amount that's involved makes it imperative that we look at that. And so I don't know, they say sunlight's the best disinfectant, but sunlight in procurement is something that this open procurement, open contracting effort initiative, or actually you call it an open contracting partnership, that is what it's trying, and I think it's laudable. Where do CSOs come in? obviously the parties that are interested or have vested interests are not going to be transparent, or not going to want to be transparent. And so you have the third pillar, the third, state and civil society, which needs to come in. I am also looking forward to the Mongolia initiative, because I was there around 2 years ago, and I'd spoken to some of the coalition, the CSO members who were in the procurement, who were working in the procurement area. And I thought that was brilliant, because I happened to speak to both the government and the CSO colleagues, and the biggest thing that was coming is, there's a big if government is actually interested in dialoguing with civil society, and we face this in other sectors as well, then who do they dialogue with? Who do they interlocute with? Because we talk about civil society organizations as a homogenous group, but it is not that. Lots of countries we've seen that civil CSOs are co-opted completely. The minister probably has a dozen of them. You ask, whichever funds come in from government and goes to some ministers or some elected representatives, CSOs. And there's collusion there. So a government would typically shy away from dealing with CSOs, not just for procurement, for most types of sector dialogues, or for most types of interaction, because they don't know who to pick and choose. And you can't pick one CSO and ignore the others, because that's the end of your government CSO interaction. And I thought it was a laudable initiative there, and I think there are some very good examples. Philippines Procurement Watch, which I'm sure most of you have heard. I was just going through a document a couple of days ago, and one of the statistics that kind of came up is that with Procurement Watch being involved, there's a 58% reduction in savings in the Bureau of Corrections in the Philippines, which is the bureau which looks after prisons and supplies and stuff like that. It's like just a simple intervention of creating more citizen monitors, making it a little more transparent, doing e-procurement, a bunch of those measures. If that is the amount of saving that it can bring, then it undermines, or it just, I feel that why are we even looking at other little things scratching here and there, when this is the heart of the matter? But I think I've crossed my time, and I will stop here for the moment. I look forward, as I'm sure all of you do, to this very interesting session. And with this, I hand over to Marcella to take charge of the session.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. And for us, it's really a pleasure to team up for this BPL with you, because the group that Sanjay works with and all the demand for good governance work is very dear to the Open Contracting Initiative, because it's actually a great avenue to really be able to make this concept a reality in many settings around the world through the bank efforts. So for those who don't know me, my name is Marcela Rosso. I work with the World Bank Institute, and I lead the Open Contracting team at the WBI. And precisely for the reasons that Sanjay was mentioning, is that WBI started working on this open contracting effort some 3 years ago, starting from working with groups of stakeholders at country level to look into what was needed for improving contract monitoring at country level, and very quickly finding out that access to information was one of the critical elements needed to actually be able to do this work, and seeing that in the international arena there were a lot of calls for transparency, like in general terms, a lot of calls for opening budgets in general terms, a lot of efforts for, in concrete cases, opening up budgets, but contracts was an area where actually there was not enough international advocacy and concrete efforts to really open up this world for increased participation and increased sunlight, as Sanjay was saying. So we started working on this open contracting effort that is basically focused on improving disclosure and monitoring, disclosure and participation, sorry, of open contracts. Meaning by open contracts, the whole contracting cycle from where the needs are assessed for a particular project to when the contract is finally implemented, delivered, and closed. And talking about open contracting broader than just procurement or what has traditionally been considered procurement, but looking also into more complicated contexts like extractive industries contracts, public-private partnerships, land deals, these kinds of things that actually nowadays are very, very high in the international agenda, and are sectors where frequently the obscurity has been greater than at the level of procurement, where through the international conventions and other efforts there has been like a longer term push for at least disclosure of information on public contracts. And trying to take it, as I was saying, further on into the elements of participation. So how can you really not only disclose information and continue making efforts from the government's side on putting information out into the open, but how do you really build capacity of citizens to be able to use this information, because the world is populated with tons of data that nobody's using. So the challenge is how to really prepare and support civil society organizations and citizens to actually be able to use this information, analyze it, understand it, give feedback to those governments, so that actually with the feedback from their citizens they actually can take administrative measures so that the output of the contracts are better, that these contracts are more effective in delivering what they're supposed to deliver, and at the end they contribute to better development outcomes, which is what we are all working for. So we have been doing this effort and bringing or collaborating with others in this effort, and we have organized and recently launched what is called the Open Contracting Partnership, which is the main organizations that are from an institutional perspective supporting this work. And here we are from WBI working with the GIZ, with Integrity Action that actually Claire is representing here, with the Construction Sector Transparency Initiative that is another of the main partners, Transparency International, Oxfam America, very much interested in the extractive industries and land side of the open contracting work. And we also have in the Open Contracting Partnership the government of Colombia and the government of the Philippines, who are represented there by their procurement authorities, let's say. So it's a mixed group of organizations and institutions pushing this initiative and trying to build this conscious of open contracting as a norm, as something that should be understood as a given, that giving information on public contracts and on the whole public contracting process and allowing people to participate and feedback and engage on this is something that should be like a common understanding and not something that could be questioned by anybody in the future. So this is what we do. We basically are working on open contracting through a group of activities that are implemented at the global level and others at the country level. At the global level, we're promoting public open contracting principles, and we have developed a first set of principles that we're going to soft launch for comments from a broader consultation after a year that we have done of consultations already on these principles. We're working on data standards of how to propose to government and internationally agreed data standards that they could use for disclosure of information. We're working on implementation support and tools to countries so that the stakeholders at the country level can actually have resources and tools to do contract monitoring, to engage with their governments. The governments have tools and resources to actually disclose better their information. We're working on research and measurement to actually make the case for open contracting on the basis of verifiable data. A lot of an advocacy and public outreach, so we are working with the G8, we're working with the Effective Institution platform that OECD is promoting after the Busan aid effectiveness efforts. We're working with the OGP, so a lot of this to get this concept on the international sort of advocacy platforms. And we're very happy to say that this has had a lot of uptake. So not only from donors, from countries, from researchers, the open contracting term has actually been picked up quite a bit. And not only by all of them, but also by the World Bank. So recently in the transparency meeting, Caroline Einstein gave a presentation and a statement where she actually explained how open contracting is being promoted directly by the World Bank, not only through its own disclosure of its databases of contracts that were previously reviewed by the bank, but also starting to disclose the contracts that the bank is directly doing through their central, let's say, procurement activity. And promising that open contracting is going to be mainstreamed into the procurement policy of the bank. So actually we're really happy that we are having this acceptance and this political commitment of the World Bank also with its internal procedures towards promoting open contracting. And the only way of doing this is really putting tools and resources on the hands of people. So that is what the book sprint was about, trying to put together a tool that helps people understand how this has been done by other people in other places, how they can actually use these mechanisms and these tools to promote open contracting in their countries. So that is what we did during this last week, concentrated in a place to do that. And that is what we wanted to share with you today. So in the framework of open contracting, how we have developed this book in 5 days with a number of excellent and fantastic partners to do it. I don't want to say anything more. I'm going to give the word to Carrie, who's going to take us through the rest of the agenda and through what we're going to do today to hear the experiences from all the colleagues that have been part of this open contracting book sprint. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Sanjay, as well for being here and starting us off. The way that this will work, I think you all probably saw in the announcement, there are two sort of separate sections. The first half is typical presentations with then questions and answers. And we'll have two of those, one focused on the Mongolia experience and one focused on the book sprint that we just went through last week. And then the second half, we're going to split up into small groups, and you see the signs around. I'll explain more of that when we get there. But all this means that it's a really ambitious agenda, so we're going to try and keep as close on time as we can. We're already a little behind, so we'll see how this goes. Before we begin, we're going to do a really quick round of introductions, and since we're late, then I mean really quick. So I'm Carrie Klutz. I'm with the World Bank Institute's Open Contracting team.
Ted Greger, WBI front office.
My name is Patrick Elward. I work for Unitate on health product procurement.
Emily, I'm in Aptos. Sabrina Roshan, the Aptos GAC and operations team.
Newcomer with the Public Sector Governance Group.
Zahid, East Asia PREM.
Otgonjargal, I'm from Mongolia.
Adam Hyde, I'm the founder of the book sprint method.
Schouten, Integrity Action.
Sanjay Agarwal, Social Development Department.
Gilbert Sandogu, Africa Innovation Center.
Marcela Rosso, Open Government, WBI.
Norma Garza, Open Government and Open Contracting, World Bank Institute.
Catherine Frauscher, Open Contracting.
Agustín Flas, Torrent Asset Recovery Initiative.
Robert Hunja, I work in WBI.
Luis Prada, MENA Procurement.
Vijay, MENA Procurement.
Denise Wolfenson, both team Open Government at the WBI.
Jared Haddon with the Infrastructure Policy Unit and Sustainable Development.
Don Parafina from ASA East Asia Pacific, based in Manila.
Gladys Salasa from Ateneo School of Government in Manila.
Aaron Leonard from the World Bank Institute Knowledge Exchange Team.
I'm Sunny Chang, EAP from Public Sector.
Essia Mary from the World Bank Institute Knowledge Exchange Team.
Atsuko Moroga from EAP Education.
Lauren Pfeiffer from the One Campaign.
Conrad Tadin, WBI from the South African office.
Kamra Chulta, WBI Social Accountability Group.
Santiago Delgado, WBI Social Accountability.
Marcelo Vitron, Latin America, Public Sector Governance.
Prosper Lindorera, Lab Procurement.
I'm Mary Klutz. I'm Carrie Klutz's mother from
I'm Lawrence Klutz. I'm Carrie Klutz's brother.
Okay, I don't work with Carrie, but
You wish you did.
I wish I did. I'm actually from legal procurement, legal operations, and the legal vice president of the World Bank.
Melita Manca, legal procurement unit in legal vice presidency.
Melita Hosworth, with Open Partnership here in WZF.
Anders Peterson, the Open Knowledge Foundation, and we're going to be open spending project.
Michael Denley here at the World Bank, OPCS, GAC, and Operations.
Deepak Jain, I work with internal audit.
Ali Accent, Human Development Group.
Sure. My name is Leon Wong from GST Corporate Procurement.
Caroline Sproul, World Bank Institute, Open Government.
Sasha is with WBI too.
WBI, Open
Thank you
Contract.
all so much. It's awesome to have such a great group now that I look like a tomato. And we'll move right into the presentations. The first one is focused on CSO participation and procurement monitoring in Mongolia. And we have two really special presenters with us. The first is Zahid Hasnain, who's a senior public sector specialist with EAP and PREM. And he's got an interest in public financial management and works on projects across South Asia and EAP, but of course we've asked him to focus specifically on Mongolia. And our other presenter is Otgonjargal Norovjav. Did I say that right? Yes. Otgoo? I call her Otgoo. And she's a procurement expert and the founder of the Public Procurement Partnership, which is a network of CSOs working in Mongolia. And she has given me a new thing to say. She's working with development partners on procurement reform. So she's going to be speaking about her experience with the partnership. So I'll turn it over to her.
Okay, thanks very much. So I'll be brief. Let me just give you a brief context for on Mongolia and why procurement is so important. Procurement reform is so important there. I mean, basically, Mongolia is a small country with huge natural resources, and that is kind of the central engagement that the bank has is on how Mongolia can avoid the resource curse. And I'm really talking huge global scale natural resources in copper and coal. It's only a country of 2.6 million people, but it's been growing at double-digit rates over the last 5-6 years. In 2011, the growth rate was 17%. Last year it was 12%. Over the medium term, it's likely to be again in the double digits. And that's because it's a big, huge mines, international scale mines. They have among the largest reserves of copper and coal that have been discovered. So that in itself creates a big shock, a positive shock. And so the whole agenda is how can the necessarily enclave nature of these mines be used to benefit the population. And the main mechanism, one of the main mechanisms through which that can happen is through public expenditures. And the government's revenues have been increasing very rapidly. To give you a sense, the scale of capital spending has increased 35 times in nominal terms over the last 10 years. Enormous, right? We're talking about enormous expansion in infrastructure spending and enormous expansions in procurement. And because it's a small country with limited capacity, that is straining the government systems considerably. And the bank's engagement through our country partnership strategy, I mean, it's actually a pretty simple engagement because the future of Mongolia basically rests on how they can use these mineral resources in an effective way, right? It's a pretty simple way for the bank to engage. But the problems are huge as well, and particularly because it's a small country, we find that the resource curse risks are exaggerated because conflicts of interest abound. Everyone knows everyone, and in that environment, having sort of competitive procurement becomes a real challenge. To give you a sense of this, in 2007, roughly half of all the procurement contracts were done through direct contracting in the transport and power sectors. And these were politically connected firms, sort of small networks that are engaged, very closely aligned to members of parliament. So that's the real sort of challenge, right? In terms of the political kind of stakeholder, political economic context of Mongolia is both encouraging as well as discouraging. It's an incredibly open country. I mean, very vibrant democracy. Parliamentary elections are held every 4 years. Very educated population. That's the legacy of socialism in 95% literacy. Very high tertiary enrollment rates. Very informed, engaged population. You don't have sort of the problems of ethno-linguistic fragmentation that you see in South Asia or Africa. It's homogeneous in the very homogeneous country, and that's those are all positive initial conditions. But because it is so small and the conflicts of interest are so considerable, in a sense, this openness is also very easily ignored. So you'll have lots of sort of complaints on the media, you'll have lots of citizen engagement, lots of local mobilization, but at the same time, incredible sort of immunity of key policymakers from actually being held in check by sort of voice, by citizen voice. So that makes it interesting and also at the same time frustrating at times. Members of parliament have considerable policy making authority and power, and basically they're the ones who are essentially calling the shots when it comes to public expenditure decisions and procurement decisions. So that's sort of the context in which the kind of the economic and the political social context. Now the government has been the bank has been engaged in this whole area of natural resource management. On the fiscal policy side, so on the mining extractive side, on fiscal policy side, and on the public expenditure side. And there's been remarkable change over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of passages of new laws. So there's a new fiscal responsibility law, a new budget law, a new procurement law, which is what we'll talk about, which has this provision of civil society monitoring. So there's been a lot of dynamism, but the implementation challenges of these laws has also been considerable. And part of it, if any of you have read Matt Andrews, he talks about laws as signaling devices. And I think part of that is what's also happening in Mongolia is that laws are passed, but probably more as signaling devices and perhaps with sometimes less implementation, less seriousness about implementation. So the real challenge for the bank in engaging in Mongolia is how we can help them actually implement some of these laws, most of which are actually in the right direction and have the right sort of policy thrust. So that's why we started focusing in on the procurement law. So this was passed in 2011, and the novel feature here is civil society organizations have a responsibility and a role both in the bid evaluation stage, so membership of bid evaluation committees, and in contract monitoring, so monitoring of both open and closed contracts, a select number. And this, remarkably again, and this goes to the fact that it is such an open society, civil society organizations, and Otgoo can talk about this, were actually involved in the drafting of this law. And this was a homegrown initiative. Some key members of parliament, some of them who were more reform-oriented, felt that this was, there was this big capture that was taking place and that something had to be done about it. So they, in partnership with CSOs, put in these provisions. So the key now is, how do we ensure implementation? Because there are lots of forces working in the other direction, sort of the oligarchs that are in the process of formation. And so the bank has been engaging in this through ongoing projects as well as through the GPF, as well as analytical work. And on the one hand, working with the Ministry of Finance, that has the main responsibility for setting procurement policy and for procurement monitoring. And then through the GPF and encouraging this nascent movement of civil society organizations to form a network, to start organizing to implement this law. On the project side, we've helped the Ministry of Finance get information on the web in helping devise and implement procurement regulations and general capacity building. But also, I think, really to try to bridge, be kind of the interlocutors between government and civil society. And I think we've tried to facilitate the dialogue between these two key parties of this sort of constructive engagement, to have this necessary constructive engagement. And one of the immediate concerns, and following up on what Sanjay said, was that again, with Mongolia, such a small society with conflicts of interest abound, is how do you engage with the right CSOs, right? Because as you said, each member of parliament have their own pet CSOs. So for the Ministry of Finance in particular, their concern was, okay, how do we, in order to implement this law, we need legitimate CSOs, and that's where the idea of this procurement network developed. It's like you need some vehicle for ensuring that the members of this network abide by certain standards and avoid conflict of interest. And that's how we started coming in also to help the Public Procurement Partnership, which was formed in 2011, start thinking about, what could be a code of ethics, what are some standards that members who join, CSOs who join the partnership would have to abide by. And I think that reassurance was essential, because without that, I think the Ministry of Finance would not have felt comfortable engaging with the emerging civil society partnership. And I think through this process, we've had some important achievements. The Ministry of Finance and the CSO network have been collaborating on devising implementing regulations. They've signed a memorandum of understanding, which lays out rights and responsibilities of each party. The partnership has helped the Ministry of Finance prepare a online web-based observer report, which CSOs can use to put in their observations on bid evaluation. And they're in the process of agreeing on a select number of contracts that they can monitor. And the MOU is really about what information can be shared, and and also agreement that once there are findings, that these would be made public, and that this would not be sort of hidden under a veil of secrecy. And the Ministry of Finance is really seeing the network as an ally to try to get to some of these renewed pressures on more and more direct contracting, and basically parking huge sort of chunks of the capital budget away from public scrutiny. So they're trying to use the partnership as Israeli allies in their agenda against sort of the big spending ministries that have other interests. What we're in the process of trying to do now in the next stage is actually demonstrate some success in procurement monitoring of specific projects. We're looking at the road sector in particular. And the partnership has signed a memorandum of understanding with local governments so that they can actually select a few contracts and start monitoring them. And the challenge, of course, going forward is how to make this whole process sustainable. We've been talking a lot about sustainable funding mechanisms right now. It's really the World Bank that is helping them, but we're hoping that through demonstrating some success, they can go to other donors, other development partners, and there are a number of them, like the Swiss and Zahid in particular, who are interested in supporting CSOs. So hopefully, once we have some success, we can build on this and put them on a sustainable footing. So that's my time is up, but I think Otgoo can add a lot more.
So at the same time, as also mentioned, as a dangerous flag in Mongolia, it's direct contracting clauses which were introduced in 2007, and it's thank God it's removed in 2011. But now key challenges, a new government is quite keen to bring it back to the place. So as a CSO and former CSO network, we will try to stop it as much as possible. As a one advantage is I'm appointed as a member in the working group in the parliament presenting CSO. So I will try to inform them and make them aware of the danger and the risks of the public direct contracting there. So how it might be interesting for you how PPP formed, because since we have a law, we have to think about how to implement it, how actually make it in the right way, because since we have a right reason, we have to implement it in the right way. Otherwise, it can be very easily removed and nullified. So it's always hard to talk about CSO with the government. Then, without World Bank team, World Bank Institute team, it cannot be happened in this very easily way. Because why I'm saying easily way is World Bank support is particularly the Mr. Zahid, Hasnain, and Ms. Catherine Frauscher. I would like to emphasize here is few other team of you guys. Also Joel Turkowitz, they all input a lot, they donated a lot, and without their help, it might take longer. So we formed as a network in 2012. We have 1 year old, so it's a baby. But in terms of building capacity, as building trust with the government, it started quite earlier than the 2012. So also it was our question how to provide independency and the capacity there in terms of human resource as well as methodology to implement the law in an efficient way. So World Bank helped on these issues. So they helped us to be formed as a network, and they helped us to build some capacity on the monitoring methods developing. Also, Answer team also was one of our supporting partner. And how far we reach it now is we have a MOU. I brought it, which might be interesting for you. So it's signed on behalf of CSO Network. It's signed the board director, and on behalf of government, it's signed by the State Secretary of the Minister of Finance. So the meaning is this document enables us to implement actually the procurement monitoring in the field. Without this document, it was quite unclear how to implement the law, because it's because we don't have yet the regulatory implementary rules and regulations in the place. So that's why. And it also will help us to start by piloting and through the implementation, through the demonstration while we implement it. So during the implementation, we committed to the government to draft the component of the implementation component of monitoring rules and regulation, which should be adopted by the Minister of Finance. So that kind of agendas we have. And sorry, I'm running out of the time. So also it will help us to provide our sustainability in the future, because other donors expressed to help us, but without any demonstration or without any capacity, they would wait us. So it will also help us. We hope to make some demonstration in the actual implementation work in the field. As well as I have only one sentence on Booksprints initiative, because I was part of this team, and if you guys interested, I wrote one chapter, Enabling Environment, which is named that. Also, the Hamish called the Scottish guy helped me on improving in English version. So, and basing on the experience what happened in Mongolia, as expecting the optimal level of environment, I wrote this chapter. It will give you some information about Mongolia Public Procurement Initiative, CSO initiative in the public procurement. So one thing, as I would like to stop by saying one Mongolian ancient phrase, which is very famous. So it says, if you have a fire in your heart, your oven will have fire very soon. Yes, and also open contracting team, I have to express my particular gratitude, because they are a very brilliant team, and I wish if we could bring the open contracting as a UN commitment, also if we could develop it as a very modern design or modern type of interdiscipline, it would be very helpful for the people to improve the performance through the accountability. So third party CSO would ensure the accountability, but we have to be very aware about our limitation. As a legal body, we have also some obligation. That's the key information I would like to give. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. And thank you both. And that actually the Mongolian saying that you left us with is a great transition to the book sprint, because I think we all took our fire out of our hearts and put them right in there. And so, as y'all have heard, a lot of us have just returned and are probably still catching up on sleep from spending the last week, 5 days straight, sequestered in rural Maryland, writing this book that you see in front of us. And so our next presentations will be focused on that, and we're lucky to have with us Adam Hyde, who is the founder of the Book Sprint methodology, as well as BookType, which is an online book production platform that we actually wrote the book in, and I think he'll explain a little more about that. And then we're going to hear from Claire Schouten, who is the program director for the Network for Integrity and Reconstruction. with Integrity Action, which is a coalition of organizations that are working in conflict-affected states. And she's also part of the cost secretariat and the Open Contracting Partnership, which is excellent to have her representing that here as well with us, as well as the OGP UK Civil Society Network. So I will turn it over to the two of them.
Great. I go first. Okay, so I'll put some photos up here. The resolution's a bit funny, so people look a little bit wider than they really are. So I'll just give you an understanding. This was taken on the first day of the book sprint, and the book sprint over 5 days more or less breaks up into 3 phases. The first phase is concept development, which is what we're doing here as a group, where we work through as a team together what the book is going to be and what should be in it and the structure and things like this. And it's very important that this is very egalitarian, that everybody gets their say, every voice comes into the book, and we negotiate the scope and the content together. The second part of the process is actually the production process, where we all actually start writing, and this usually happens on the second day. So first day, you come into the room with nothing but a title and a bunch of people that you may know of or may know or not know. You negotiate the book's content, and that's it. On that first day, it's all done in terms of the scope and the table of contents. Then the next days, more or less the next 2.5 to 3 days, you're actually producing the content. So you start off generally writing to the topic that you feel the most passion for, the most fire for, and so that you can get into a flow. And my job as a facilitator is to keep that flow going. So when somebody sort of breaks out of that flow, to find them something else to do that they can focus on. And increasingly, as the process goes forward, we break into groups and start looking at each other's work and talking about the content that we've been developing. And the last phase is really the kind of shared review process, which is really when a lot of the content has been finished, to go through it together, to look at the structure, to look at the flow, to rework it, to keep hammering at it, restructuring it, and then proofing and all this kind of thing follows on from that. And then at 6 o'clock usually on the last day, that's it. We sort of we celebrate somehow. We all had to leave unfortunately very quickly, so we jumped up in the air, and that was that. So I'll show you a few others. So the point about the book sprint methodology is that it's there to draw the experience out of all of the individual stakeholders and to really get that rich content and those rich experiences out of them and into the book, and really exploring those nuances. So this book is a product of people's practice. The nuances of experience. It's not a high-level book that's looking at it from 30,000 feet in the air. It's written by people and their day-to-day stuff. Like very very clear, practical issues are outlined. You see how to work there. It's been in existence for about 5 years. I started the book sprint methodology 5 years ago, starting with software books, writing books about software, and increasingly pushing it into new areas. Done one on open spending in London a while ago, open oil, which you saw just there, and a few other books within the NGO sector. But also pushing it into the humanities and things like this. So currently, I've done 60 book sprints, facilitated 60 book sprints, which is over a year of my life just gone. But it's also 60 books, or even more than that, because some of the book sprints I do some with Google, some are code, and we produce 3 or 4 books all at once. So produce more than 60 books, generally under free licenses, so that people can reuse this content as much as possible. And the software assists this, but it also enables us to, it's a collaborative production software called BookType. It assists the production, so everybody writing here is writing in their laptops into that environment. You can see what everybody else is writing. And then it will output immediately to book formatted PDF so that you can print it. And then I can pass this around if anybody wants to see it, but on iPads, the look and feel is exactly the same. You can translate that one-to-one. And Mobi's for the Kindle, you can't, because Mobi's are really a bad format, and the Kindle has very limited sort of rendering capacity. But anyway, so at the end of the day, you can push the button and immediately you've got that content for distribution, which is a very phenomenal thing in terms of, you know, if you look ever inside publishing, publishers can't understand how this is at all possible. And largely that's because they've been tied up in their own, you know, legacy workflows and tool chains. Yeah, and that's all I think I'll say.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. Okay.
Well, it's just funny to look at those photos. We're actually happier than we might look. Context.
Focused and concentrated.
So maybe I can add a bit more on the who, what, when, where, and how the process as well. In terms of who, I mean, there were 16 practitioners, and we really focused on the idea of practitioners because we came from different continents, different experiences, many different networks, including conflict and affected states, but we were cutting across government, development partners, and civil society, as well as engineers and the contracting profession. So it was really a great mix of people, and in terms of our why were we there, it was really a commitment to open contracting. And open contracting means different things. So even when Adam said we had the title set, originally it was quite focused on contract monitoring, and that really shifted to, no, how can we get citizen engagement in the early stages of contracting? How can we think beyond contract monitoring? What does it really mean to have disclosure and participation throughout the process? What does it mean to have contracting performance rather than just contract performance, and ultimately the legitimacy of the process? So we were covering from incentives and capacities through to the risks in the process, through to disclosure and participation, through to the ultimate outcomes that we're all seeking to achieve. So that was an exciting process. And as we said, we were locked up, but you can see it's a beautiful space for 5 days. And it was intense, 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night, really working through these ideas and then trying to do our own personal work afterwards, I think, or in the morning. So it was very intense, but that was really a signal of the commitment of the people involved. And for some of us, we were very attached to the material and really agonizing over the words, but others, you know, we had an initial draft and we passed it on. So it was a constant process of peer review, of support. And when we talk about the criteria for the people involved, as far as I know, there weren't too many set criteria. It was more about getting people who are open to collaborative approaches around the table, and also who had experiences to share, again, representing networks and sharing those experiences. In terms of the how, again, it was a very interesting process of collaboration, of constant discussion, and where do we want this to go, so that it's much more than the book itself, but where do we as a community of practice want to move forward? Who do we want to bring on board? If this becomes a UN addenda, how do we encourage the policy take-up of this? And also we had discussions about open government partnerships, the various sectoral initiatives that we're involved in, the UN Convention Against Corruption, and perhaps, since I know we're short on time, just ending on that note, I think it's interesting because those of us coming from an anti-corruption, transparency, accountability, good governance, and integrity building background, where a lot of the emphasis is on frying the big fish. And it's actually amazing to be part of a community now that's about building a bigger fish, of a community of practitioners who are committed to open contracting. So it was a fantastic experience. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much to all four of you, and we'll open it up for a question and answer for a few minutes if anybody has anything they want to ask either about Mongolia or about Book Sprint or Paris. Anyone? No? All clear? Yes.
I'm trying to take 3 publications. I'm trying to publish 3 documents by the end of June, so I'm grappling with all the processes that come in. So I was wondering, how did you circumvent those? Do you need to get formal peer reviews? Is this not a bank document, or I don't know. I mean, it's great you could actually do this, and I think it testifies to the approach. But just the sheer fact that, you know, we have so many quality control processes, it takes months to be able to go through them. So I was just wondering what happened there, if there will be lessons learned for all of us.
Well, you want to, I mean, from the bank perspective, I mean, I think we, before going into this, we had a conversation with the open contracting partnership, so the partners in the open contracting partnership, and proposed to them that this would be an open contracting partnership publication. So actually it's meant to be an open contracting partnership publication where the World Bank were participants and contributed a piece to it. It is a very different book from a typically published book, and Adam can correct me on this, but like it's not meant to be a perfect publication with all the peer review. It is actually the fantastic product of 70 people working for a week and producing or sort of dropping into this piece into this document the part of the immense experience that they have. Excuse me.
Publisher.
It's a sorry.
It's a publisher.
And part of the fantastic part of the fantastic piece of it is that we feel, and that was part of what we discussed with the community of us printers as we decided to call ourselves. We wanted to be a living document, so we have managed to put there some experience that we were able to bring. But what we expect is that after we sort of settle down and have another look at it, we want to open it up to others, to bring other experiences into it, so that it's something that continues to grow. And that is going to be our peer review. I mean, that is the way where we're going to bring others into the picture. But somehow, I mean, we will edit it, we will improve it, but we don't feel that it will ever be a closed product, but just a tool that continues to build on what others have initially produced and others can bring their experience into too. So that makes it easier somehow.
I only request you to put in something in the change management group of knowledge that simplify the process and say it can be done so quickly.
No, just apropos a conversation we had just yesterday with you. There are some things you can only do very well if you do them outside this institution. I think this is a perfect example. You wouldn't be able to do this within this place. I just wanted to share some good news as we continue the conversation. Yeah. So all of you know the G8 has been meeting this week in a place whose name I can't pronounce. Anyway, they've issued a declaration, and the number 10, which is the final of these declarations, reads as follows. Governments should publish information on laws, budgets, spending, national statistics, elections, and government contracts in a way that is easy to read, reuse, so that citizens can hold them to account.
Wow.
So, you know, that contracts are now finding their way into these kind of documents is really a big breakthrough, including for open contracting partnership. So I just thought that you share that piece of news, just to give us some more inspiration.
And actually, just to mention that I said at the beginning that we had been working on these principles that we hope will be like the basis for all these things to become real. So we have a copy of the principles that we hope to soft launch starting tomorrow. So I'm going to send it around, so for those who are interested can have a look. Okay. Yes, please.
You know, you mentioned that the next stage is sort of looking at the successes, or what does success look like? I mean, when do you have a sense of what it is that you would monitor? What are the results? So just wondering if you could elaborate on that point.
What would success look? I mean, I think one element of success would be sustained partnership. So just in terms of actually, stepping away from discovering problems in the actual contract would be getting the trust and having a formal partnership that is not just limited to Ministry of Finance, but actually goes to some of the implementing agencies as well. So we're really hoping for, these local governments and other ministries start viewing civil society as partners to improve the quality of expenditures. So I think that for me would be the biggest element of success. But then moving to the more specific issues to open contracting, it would be, of course, uncovering problems that we know exist at the bidding stage as well as the execution stage in terms of quality, right? In terms of actually improving the quality of the road. Right? I mean, that would be success if they can actually show that the current systems of project supervision are weak, and that civil society can actually complement government systems by pointing to breakdowns during various stages of the project cycle. They can actually pinpoint to those, right? I think that would be success. So if we can document this, hopefully that will then earn the trust of the government, and foster constructive engagement, and then also earn the trust of other development partners, so that this becomes more sustainable. I think that's what we're looking at.
But are you seeing evidence of that happening?
It's too early. It's true. I mean, I think the breakthrough we've had with the Ministry of Finance is not something to be minimized. I mean, that is a big achievement. I mean, it's unusual, seeing. I mean, for example, in the Philippines, which is the other example in the region, right, of open contracting. I mean, the difficulty has been to gain the trust of the Ministry of Finance, right, which is the key policy and monitoring agency when it comes to procurement. In Mongolia, you actually have had tremendous progress with the Ministry of Finance. It's the spending agencies which are more difficult, right? So I think that fact that you have, the keeper of the procurement regulations is viewing civil society as a partner, I think is a tremendous breakthrough. And now the question is, can we actually build on this and actually start?
So one thing, who signed the State Secretary was the former public procurement policy making body. He was heading the public procurement policy department in the Ministry of Finance. He knows very well about the public procurement context in the country, and so we built mutual trust based on our long-term cooperation. So we know each other. It's also an advantage of having few number of population. So that's why we build trust based on a long-term relationship.
First, I'd like to thank you so much for this. It's very interesting because our group in legal department do a lot of public procurement law reviews. And
You should
on
talk
a
to
daily
Otgoo.
basis.
She's a legal expert.
So this is one of the issues that comes up very often, and the countries are trying more and more to adopt provisions like in your law. We struggle a little bit to understand, maybe because at the phase that we are looking, it's only the law, and maybe the implementing regulations will shed more light. But one of the issues we struggle is first, how do you handle the conflict of interest situations that arise, especially in countries of very small population. Second is, where do you find people who are qualified to understand procurement process? Because we don't expect that all the CSOs will have such a ability. And third, I wanted to know when they have these findings about possible violations or breaches of the procurement procedures, where do they report, and is there any obligation by the agencies, government agencies, to comply with, or if not, what are the remedies in those cases? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good question. I asked it from you, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. It's not only about legal issue. To introduce CSO's involvement in public procurement. Yeah, as a lawyer, we can focus on the legal part. But in enabling environment, it shows different contexts, institution building as well as the data management. So in order to ensure the risk of the conflict of interest, so what we have used is we actually adopted the WE means public procurement partnership, which contains several CSOs who signed on our general declaration.
100 CSOs right now.
Yeah, 100 we have. Totally.
It's a pretty big organization.
Yeah.
Really.
As a CSO involvement, we can't. It's not obligatory, so it's optional. So they can join us easily by signing, by understanding and accepting the declaration. So declaration says that it's our general objective. So also it says that we promise to comply, we commit to comply the code of ethic of the partnership. So once they contract with the government agency to monitor the actual performance, the code of ethic would be attached to the contract, the monitoring contract. So that will provide somehow accountability for the CSO monitors. And that's how we are trying to make it. And so, if you go through this environment, will give you some information. And second question was how? Please, could you please?
How do you handle conflict of interest? How do you find people that are qualified to understand?
We started because monitoring, CSO monitoring in public procurement wasn't very new. It started almost 5 years ago. Some other organizations such as Mercy Corps and Open Foundation, Open Society Foundation, this kind of organization were funding it. Also, I have to emphasize here some ground initiative. Some other provinces itself, they started by themselves and they already formed very small group as a citizen and the CSO group, and they already started monitoring and they developed some program to improve the public procurement in the provincial level, and they already accepted by the provincial parliament, local parliament, and they contracted with the government. Even parliament allocated some budget for them, small amount of money. So in order to also ensure the independency, we can't rely on the public money only, right? That's why I hope that through the support of World Bank Institute and World Bank support, we will have a possibility to demonstrate our capacity it will enable us to have some actual methods how to do procurement monitoring. But we are focusing on the road sector as a start. So then we'll go to the Swiss, we'll go to the other guys, and make some money.
Long term, that is
long term. This is our agenda.
Just to add on the implementation issues, and one of the things we've been working with the Ministry of Finance together, the partnership is okay, so take bid evaluation, right? So they've developed this online tool where CSOs can put in observations on the procurement process. Was the bid evaluation committee notified in proper time? Did they meet? Was the process followed? Not on the technical aspects of the procurement, but was the due process followed, right? So hopefully the observations will be there, and then the idea is can Ministry of Finance have some protocols on how they can then follow up on the findings, right? So can there be a risk-based audit? I mean, this is the type of conversation we're having with the Ministry of Finance, and that's where this MOU really helps, is because because there is already this trust. They can then say, okay, in this particular province, looking at the pattern of these observation reports, it looks like something was going on, and then we, as in our capacity for procurement monitoring, which is the authority that the Ministry of Finance has, can then do an audit and see, to what extent is there something going on here, right? So that's the kind of stuff that hopefully will go in some of these implementing regulations. So that's on the Ministry of Finance side, and for the CSO network, it's about making the information available publicly through various channels, right? And that's where I think that's kind of the next stage.
Yes. Additionally, responding on the non-compliance, which revealed by the CSO monitoring. So, of course, we will inform it to the government. Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance itself has a unit which has a power and function to inspect the actual process. So we would be very working closely with the guys before publishing and publicly, before disclosing it publicly, because we are aware of our limitation.
Sorry to follow up on that. You don't communicate to the agency initially about your findings, or
we have to inform it initially our findings to the Minister of Finance, which has a role of inspection.
Okay.
So when there is non-compliance and the violation of the law.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great, thanks. And we're going to pause questions for there and go ahead and move into the open space. And if there are still questions, you can maybe find the people as the discussions are ongoing. And the way that this will work, it's sort of a small group discussion, and we've asked 3 of our book sprints participants to sort of lead those. And they'll share their country experiences and have topics, several different topics that they'll sort of lead a discussion around. And it's really a chance for you to learn more about what most interests you. So the way that it'll work, each of our presenters will have about a minute to pitch their topic and then try to draw you into their group. And then we've got 3 separate spaces to sort of gather. And we'll have about 30 minutes in discussion, and at the end, someone from each group will have a quick overview of the main points of the discussion that they'll sort of report back in plenary to the whole group. Good? Okay, so we've got Adam, who'll be leading a discussion on book sprints over in this corner. And then we have Don Parafina, who's the Executive Director of the Affiliated Network for Social Accountability in East Asia and the Pacific, ANSA EAP. And he focuses on social accountability and anti-corruption. He's going to be leading a discussion on monitoring tools and approaches over in this corner. And last but definitely not least, we have Mr. Gilbert Sindugwa, who's here from Uganda. He's the coordinator and head of secretariat for the Africa Freedom of Information Center. He's also been instrumental in forming the Ugandan Multi-Stakeholder Contract Monitoring Coalition. And he'll be leading a discussion on coalition building over here. He's also the Africa Civil Society coordinator for the OGP. So if we can move to wherever you would like to go, we can get that started.
Pitch?
Pitch first, yeah, sorry.
Pitch first.
We could pitch it, we'll do that first. Okay, John, you want to start?
There are a number of tools available for contract monitoring. They may apply in various stages, from planning to execution to the assessment of the execution. Popular tools include participatory planning, the PEX or Public Expenditure Tracking Survey, the CRC, the Citizen Report Card, Committee Scorecard, and there are various tools specific to procurement monitoring. You may have heard Integrity Path or MKS's social audit, and there are many others governed by law. And we will be discussing all this, what these tools are and how they work. Because there are some limitations, can they work with or without law? Can ordinary citizens use these tools and stuff like that?
Thank you. Basically, we for 2011, we were many fishes like these ones, but not facing in the same direction, certainly looking in different directions, both civil society, private sector, and government. So in 2010, we agreed, following the meeting hosted by the World Bank and the World Bank Institute, we agreed to work together to promote contract monitoring together. And we worked so hard, but also I think so well that eventually we managed to form and produce tools like this, which we are now using to monitor public contracts in 5 sectors: health, education, roads, environment, and agriculture. So you are welcome to
hear the story.
to hear the story.
And the Ugandan coalition is actually a pretty interesting case. Anne?
Yeah, if you would like to know a little bit more about book sprints, we can talk about that. There's a lot of things that come out of book sprint, not just the content, but the idea of a shared mandate and a growing community around this document, and the idea of the document living and going on, and how you could do that, because it's not actually necessarily just a matter of putting it out there in the open. You actually have to invest in building the community and a network around it. So if you'd like to learn something about book sprint methodology and the kind of the values and the outcomes, then we'll talk about that.
Great. Okay.